Chapter 7, Going Down.
The morning came as a shock to his system. His eyes popped open and he turned softly to see her. Trisha lay sleeping beside him. He smiled at her peaceful face and gave her a light kiss on the forehead. Taylor got out of bed quickly, wanting to shrug off the feeling of trepidation that had fallen over him this morning. He hoped it was some form of jet lag. His feet hit the floor and he walked out of the room. Taylor was the first up in the house, even beating Theraint to the coffee machine. Taylor brewed a pot of coffee, and the room filled with the wonderful smells. He got a cup and walked to the other room. Sitting by a window, he looked out into the day. He looked down at the canal. A boat went by and struck Taylor's heart with charm. People bustled back and forth on foot and bicycle. It seemed almost as if time was a little slower to pass here, as if you could linger in a moment for a little longer than where he was from. He smiled, looking out onto the street. But it hit him again. The feeling of trepidation still hanging with him, he grimaced. Something was coming, he could feel it. Taylor was drawn to the window, wanting to be part of the living, breathing streets below. He could see why Theraint had been so moved by Amsterdam. The city was like nothing he'd seen before. Staring out to the buildings that had been built so long ago, he could almost hear the stories as they echoed. The years and years of history. Taylor flipped through a book about the Netherlands he had found on the shelves. He admired how they had pushed back the sea to gain land. They had many engineering masterpieces. He hoped that they would be able to visit more of the country while they were here. As he read, the list of places he wanted to go grew and grew. "It seems odd to read a book about a place you're sitting in," Theraint chuckled. "I guess. There's just so much in this country," Taylor replied, smiling, taking a look at the street below, just to be sure he didn't miss anything. "Yes, it seems that when you mention the Netherlands, most immediately picture hookers and drugs. However, this small country is so much more. There are museums that speak volumes. The windmill, old and new, are ingenious. There are street markets." Theraint's eyes glinted with excitement as he spoke. "There is so much more here. It is truly wonderful." Theraint paused, looking at Taylor. There was a strange look on his face. "Do you miss Utah?" Theraint asked. "Well, no. Well, maybe. I always have the mountains in my head," Taylor said. By contrast, Holland was very flat. "Yes, they are not so different, really." "What are you talking about?" Taylor asked, completely confused. "They are very much alike. When you say you are from Salt Lake City, you get much the same reaction that you get if you say you are from Amsterdam. I mean, both cities are conceived completely wrong by the rest of the planet." "That's true," Taylor said, finally putting together the pieces. "Although they are polar opposites on the scale," Taylor replied. "Well, I believe that goes without saying. It goes to show you should not judge places by what you hear." Theraint smiled. "Or people," Taylor added. Theraint smiled and raised his cup to Taylor. Taylor stood up from his perch on the window. The other side of the room was covered in etchings, although Taylor had not found time to look at any of them for more than a few seconds. His eyes constantly pulled to the city outside. There were a few bookshelves which Taylor had perused through, but already read a great deal of. He had noted a few that he'd like to take a longer look at. He started to understand how Theraint had covered walls and walls with books. Taylor had left quite a few books behind already, not having room for them. He thought back to his apartment. That old life seemed to be a long way away from now. Then the feeling hit him again. He shrugged it off the best he could. "So what's on our plate today?" Taylor asked, as he walked into the kitchen and freshened his coffee. Theraint smiled nervously. "Today will be a big day for you," Theraint replied. "Yeah, it seems like they're all big ones," Taylor grumbled back. "Yes, however, today many questions will be answered," Theraint said. Taylor walked back in the room. There was a look on Theraint's face that Taylor had never seen before. It had appeared as if he was nervous. Taylor was about to inquire more, but Amy and Trisha walked into the room. "Ouch," Amy said, rubbing her head. Trisha looked bright and ready for the day. Amy, on the other hand, looked a little bit worse for wear. Amy got her and Trisha a cup of coffee, and of course they were all drawn to the window. Soon they all stood or sat at the window, watching Amsterdam shrug off the night in favor of the morning. The bustling city starting its morning routine. The foot and bicycle traffic picked up. A gentle breeze rocked the trees lightly. They peered out the windows like children, the magic of the city taking hold of them for a while. They took turns showering and getting in a light breakfast before what Thoraind promised would be a very big day. He seemed a little on edge, or at least not quite himself. Thoraind struggled inside. Soon the truth would be known. He did not know how well it would go over, and it made him more nervous than he'd been in 100 years. As soon as they were showered and dressed, they went down to the street. Thoraind led them into the city once again. Unlike last night, this time Thoraind walked with a purpose. They had a definite destination this time around. Thoraind led them briskly through the streets. The three travelers had wanted to stop a couple times, but Thoraind seemed to have a reason to move quickly, so none of them mentioned it. They just smiled and tried to catch what they could as they walked briskly to keep up with their host. Less than a half an hour later, Taylor recognized something. He looked across the canal and down the street. He saw where Thoraind was leading them. It was a cafe that they had seen in Thoraiнд's office the first night of his vampirism. Taylor grew excited. It had been such a wonderful night. Taylor was now speeding with Thoraind, anxious to see the one place in Amsterdam he had felt like he had spent some time in before. They walked into the cafe, and Taylor had expected the mood to be light, but something was on Thoraiнд's mind. Govert looked up and gave a half smile. He gave a nod to Taylor and the girls. He stood and walked over to Thoraind. Thoraind and him had an embrace. "It's goed om je te zien," Thoraind said. "And jou, alles is klaar," Govert said. "Salvador Setta," Thoraind replied. He waved to the three and they followed him into the back. Govert went back to the front, turning to catch one last look of Taylor. He smiled. "So, he has finally come," he thought to himself, and busied himself with cleaning the counter. The back room was nothing dramatic, but Thoraind seemed more and more on edge. At first, only Taylor had picked up on it. But it had not been long before Trisha and Amy picked up the anxiety. They stood in the back room for a moment, wondering what was to come next. The room was bare, with no real decoration on the walls. A couple of boxes of product for the shop, and what looked like a beaten wooden door. Thoraind smiled at Taylor. Then he let out a deep sigh. He opened the wooden door in what looked to be a closet. Thoraind pushed a false wall, and behind was a stainless steel door. Thoraind pressed his palm on the door, and a light scanned his hand. The steel wall split in the middle, and Thoraind walked into a full-size elevator. Taylor, Trisha, and Amy followed him, looking around in awe. "I take it this does not go up?" Taylor said. Thoraind hit the buttons. The doors slipped shut, and the elevator lurched. The elevator fell into the earth. "I told you there are places that humans don't know about. Well, welcome to Atlantis too," Thoraind said, and they slowed down. The doors opened, and a collective gasp could be heard from all three new vampires. Before them lay a city completely contained under the land and sea, under Amsterdam. "It is our city. Our knowledge is in this city," Thoraind said. To say the sight was impressive would not do it justice. The entire area was covered with what looked like a giant dome window. They looked up at the sky, or what looked like the sky, the huge dome showing clouds floating by. "That's a screen?" Amy breathed out in astonishment. "Yes, it was not here in the original design," Thoraind said. Again it was clear he had bigger things on his mind. The air seemed the same as it was on the street above, but now they were 200 feet under the earth. Thoraind offered no real answers as they walked out of the elevator and into the city. The city lay out before them, and Thoraind started to lead them through the streets, if they could be called streets, more corridors. Thoraind was the only one that seemed to have direction. The other three lost in looking around the secret city. Although the technology was beyond anything they had ever seen, the art was everywhere, in forms of sculptures and paintings and other displays throughout the streets. There had been no vehicles to be seen. They had used all the space they could. They ran into a vampire here and there, surprised faces at Taylor, and then recognition washed over their faces. They smiled and nodded, but did not say much as they walked. Actually, the party got no more than hello as they walked, as if everyone there knew why they were there. Taylor felt their eyes on him. Here they clearly knew who he was. Trisha and Amy were walking around in wonder, but Taylor was starting to slip into a sour mood. Taylor was beginning to get testy. "Thoraind, how much longer?" Taylor asked. Trisha patted his arm, but it did not comfort him much. He knew he should be patient, but the feeling of trepidation was starting to take over. "We're just about there," Thorane said, offering no more. However, Taylor could feel his nervousness, and it bothered him, as he had never heard or felt Thorane on edge before. The whole day had felt off, and now, as the moment drew close, both Thorane and Taylor braced for a jolt. With each step they took, Taylor grew more and more uncomfortable. Trisha could see the conflict in Taylor and tried offering a calming hand. She could see he tried, but he grew more and more agitated. "Soon, Taylor, soon," Thorane thought to himself. It never sat entirely right, the way it had all broken down. It was the only way, Thorane heard a voice in his head. However, over the years, even he had to admit he had started to question. Had they made the right decision so many years ago? He could not answer that question. "Thorane, I need to know what's going on," Taylor said, his voice raised. "I know, and you deserve it," Thorane said, his pace accelerated.